Parkinson Society BC for offering this great event. It's certainly a unique experience for me. I've never done one of these before, but I think it's a great platform to really share some of the information that we have from the Pacific Parkinson's Research Center with a number of people kind of throughout the province. So I think this is great. But since I'm just a little face on the screen, I thought I would share a little bit about myself and how I came to research Parkinson's disease. So let's see if I can, this button, there we go. So I am a prairie boy. I'm from a small town called Okotoks in the southern part of Alberta. And it actually means big rock, which is this guy right here. That's Okotoks. That's where Big Rock Brewery gets its name. So I went off to university. I went to the University of Ottawa to study kinesiology or human kinetics there. And that's where I really get my passion for exercise. I was a kid that played a lot of sports growing up, and I even worked as a personal trainer to help pay my way through some of the university years. And that's where I had my first experience with Parkinson's disease. So one of the clients I had actually had Parkinson's disease, and I worked with him and with another trainer, and I saw his symptoms went away. And I thought this was really unique. I didn't know much about Parkinson's disease at all. I was just a young, naive, jock working out at the gym. And I thought this was quite interesting. So I ended up writing a couple of research proposals through my undergrad, and I thought this was quite interesting, and a lot of the professors thought it was as well. So I ended up pursuing my master's in this area at Wilfrid Laurier University. And they have a center there called the Sun Life Financial Movement Disorders Research and Rehabilitation Center. And they study a lot of different types of exercise and how this can be beneficial for Parkinson's disease, and kind of trying to understand exercise in general as well as some other things. So that's where I kind of really fell in love with research and fostered a lot of my interest in Parkinson's disease, and specifically with exercise. But the one thing that was missing at Wilfrid Laurier was they didn't have any neuroimaging, and I was really interested on how the brain worked, and that kind of led me to this beautiful building here. So for those of you who don't know, this is the Center for Brain Health at UBC, and this is where the Pacific Parkinson's Research Center is. So it's actually a joint venture with UBC and Vancouver Coastal Health. And the idea behind this building is to have housed within the same building clinical care. So this is where all the neurological clinics are, including the Pacific Parkinson's Research Center, as well as research. So the top 3 floors of this building are all dedicated to brain research. So this is really a unique opportunity to be able to take what we understand from animal models and molecular models and cellular information, and be able to integrate it directly into clinical care and have a really nice collaboration. So that's what we're going to really kind of look at today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to live well with Parkinson's disease, specifically with exercise, and how this might actually relate to some of the caregivers as well. And then also show you some of the research we're currently conducting, and some stuff to try to see if you guys want to participate in research. So there will be a slide at the end. If you don't want to participate, you can take down contact information and whatnot, and we can keep in touch to keep this great dialogue going. So when I was first asked to do this presentation, I kind of thought about the topic, and it was a little unique than what I typically talk about, but I thought, living well with Parkinson's disease is not much different than just living well in general. And so I really think living well means we have to make the right decisions, and it's a series of decisions that we really need to make. And some of them are very obvious. Should we be a couch potato like this guy, or should we exercise? Should we get the salad, or should we get the fries? Sometimes it is delicious to get the fries, but majority of the time we all know that we should be getting the salad and we should be getting out to exercise. So some of these choices are quite obvious. But when it comes to Parkinson's disease, some of the choices and some of the decisions we have to make are not as obvious. So things like, when should I start taking medication? When should I retire? When should I talk to my boss about my diagnosis? And some of these are very specific for young onset Parkinson's disease as well. So we really need to keep these decisions in mind. And one of the things that we always preach, and I hear a lot of clinicians preaching as well, is quality of life. So we really need to understand the decisions we make should really be centered around how are these going to impact the day-to-day activities that we do in life, and how is that really going to impact the quality that we have. So really, quality of life is related to the health-related quality of our life. So it's not necessarily measurements like lifespan or anything like that, but it's really more how the quality is, so the physical, mental, and emotional functioning that we see within life. It also measures the impact of health status, so things like different diseases or exercise or well-being, how these things impact our day-to-day activities, and well-being specifically being the positive aspects of one's life. So this is a really good website, thehealthypeople.gov. So you can go in there, it gives you a little bit more information about quality of life. But we really use quality of life to allow different decisions to be made. So, when it comes to making a decision like when should I start taking medication, we really look at, well, how is this going to impact your quality of life? How is your quality of life without medication? And is medication going to make it better? And we can use that same theory when it comes to exercise. We know exercise is really going to improve your quality of life, but we also have to monitor, is it going to cause other things like fatigue or injury? So we have to balance the two. The one issue with quality of life is that it's very subjective. So quality of life for one person might be quite different than another person. So it's very difficult to compare between these people. From a researcher perspective, yeah, we can measure this via questionnaires and whatnot, but even that is quite variable. So the one thing we can do, and the one reason why I really got interested in research, was really trying to help people with quality of life. So all the research we do, although we might do neuroimaging, for example, or look at animal models or cellular models, the end goal of our research is to really improve quality of life of people with Parkinson's disease. So what we want to do as researchers and as clinicians is gather all the information, present it to the patients, and allow them to make informed decisions that will better their quality of life in the long run. So how do we do that? Well, we first need to really understand Parkinson's disease in general. We know that's motor symptoms. Typically, that's the cardinal symptoms we see, so things like tremor, rigidity, bradykinesia, postural instability. It's also non-motor complications as well. And these often precede some of the motor complications. So these are things like sleep dysfunction, autonomic dysfunction, cognitive difficulties, anosmia or the loss of sense of smell, mood, apathy, and depressive symptoms as well. And these all stem from a neurological deficit we see in the brain. And we see this little area at the very bottom of the brainstem called the substantia nigra. And within that area, there's cells that produce dopamine. And Parkinson's disease is the death of these cells. And you can see this small red line here. That's the dopamine cells projecting into an area called the basal ganglia. And as the cells project into those areas, it results in different motor changes or different non-motor symptoms as well. So if you lose all those dopamine cells, or that dopamine, which is a neurochemical, if we lose that going into this specific area of the brain, then we're going to see some of the symptoms. So we need to understand that the decisions that we make, we're not just trying to treat specific motor symptoms or non-motor symptoms, we're actually trying to change the brain. So we have to keep this in mind as we make these decisions that really center around quality of life. So how can we really change the brain? Well, in Parkinson's disease, the thing that's been changing the brain for about 50 years is a drug called Sinemet. So this is the levodopa that's been around for, like I said, this is actually the 50th anniversary of this drug. And it's really been revolutionary in the way we can treat Parkinson's disease. So this will help replace some of the loss of dopamine we see in the disease and help supplement a lot of the motor symptoms. So it can help decrease those symptoms and again allow you to have a better quality of life. We can also stimulate the brain. So this is called deep brain stimulation, where electrodes are inserted into the area of the brain called your basal ganglia. And we can stimulate the brain at different frequencies to help normalize the brain and allow for better function. But in essence, there's a number of different ways that we can change the brain. And this is a TED Talk by Dr. Lara Boyd, and she's a researcher and a physiotherapist at UBC, and she's actually on my thesis committee. And she gave a really great TED Talk at the TEDx event in Vancouver this year about how all the experiences that we have in the day-to-day life, how this actually changes our brain. So it changes it on a cellular level, changes it on a systems level, meaning that it's going to change all the connections that your brain has made, and overall it's going to change behavior in the long run. So keep this in mind as we make decisions from day-to-day life that are going to impact our quality of life, that we can change the brain by just making simple changes on a day-to-day level. And that includes exercise. So when we look at exercise within the literature for Parkinson's disease, we see this really wide range of different types of exercise that claim to be beneficial. On one end of the spectrum, we have high-intensity aerobic training like cycling or running, and this shows benefit. There's a great 60-minute special done about rock steady boxing. That's a new program down in the States. This shows benefit. You can have resistance training. There's a big 2-year trial that was done out of Chicago, I believe, that showed resistance training was beneficial. There's groups out in New York and Toronto that are doing dance. There's a big article in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is kind of the top journal to publish all clinical trials in, that showed Tai Chi actually was better than resistance training when it comes to balance and some motor symptoms. So you kind of see this really wide range of different types of exercise that claim to be beneficial, which is great. A lot of these, some exercises really focus on motor complications. So for example, they're going to look at improving tremor or rigidity. We're going to see improvements in gait and walking and posture. You can do resistance training to try to augment some of the muscle weakness, or aerobic training to try to decrease some of the aerobic losses that we might see. Some other types of exercise that actually focus on non-motor complications. So we'll see improvements to cognition or mood and depression. We can improve sleep or autonomic function. Ultimately, all these different types of exercise should ultimately help with quality of life. So they should improve overall energy levels, for example, provide a good social system to be a part of, decrease overall stress, and really ultimately impact your life in a beneficial way. As a researcher, the most exciting part that we see in the literature right now is that there's some evidence that exercise might actually be neuroprotective, meaning that it might actually prevent the further death of cells within the brain and might actually help to grow new ones. So this would really be beneficial overall, I think. And if we can actually show this within clinical populations instead of just animal models. The neuroprotection was that there's some evidence within animal models that exercise might actually prevent the further death of brain cells. And it might actually help to grow new brain cells. So this would really be beneficial when it comes to Parkinson's disease, because we actually might be able to use exercise as an adjunct therapy and add it on to other therapies. So quite commonly when I present slides like that at other conferences and meetings, one of the questions I get is, if exercise is so good, what type of exercise should I be doing? What frequency should I be exercising at? So how much should I be doing? How hard should I be exercising? What type of exercise? And how much should I be exercising for? Jim just asked a question, as a basic rule, should I exercise target the specific area we're having difficulty with? Jim, that's a great question, and it really depends on the symptoms that you have. But like I said earlier, although Parkinson's is a movement disorder, we're not necessarily trying to change specific movements, but ultimately change the brain to get a better overall benefit. So I'll speak to that a little bit more at the end of my presentation. So, like I said, there's this FIT formula or exercise prescription. And if I had one for Parkinson's disease, that would be fantastic. And I would market it and it would be great and everyone would be very happy and be beneficial for everybody. But unfortunately, no one has this answer. So one of the issues is that there's a lot of different types of exercise out there and a lot of them show benefit, but a lot of them are different for each individual person. So this makes it quite difficult to actually hone in on what's actually occurring. What we do know, there is some benefits to changes in the brain. So we do see that exercise improves cognition, enhances learning, facilitates memory, and decreases age-related cell loss. So as we age, cells will begin to die, and exercise might actually decrease or change that, and there's a lot of evidence within the animal models that it does that. And we see changes in cellular models of this, so that's what these are different brain cells that are labeled. We see changes in animal models, and we also see neuroimaging changes. And we see this in clinical populations, but a lot of them are underrepresented in Parkinson's disease, and there's not a lot of literature on it. And this is why this has been the focus of my research. And instead of looking at the specific type of exercise or time or anything like that, we're trying to understand the mechanism of exercise and how the brain actually changes. And if we can understand that mechanism, then we're going to be better off to design exercises to really get at that mechanism for an overall better benefit, ultimately better quality of life, and help people to live with Parkinson's disease a little bit easier. So Giselle Petzinger did a really nice review. She's a researcher at the University of Southern California, and she did a really nice review on how exercise changes the brain through all the different types of neuroscience. So she showed some changes in cellular changes, so actual brain cells, overall changes in trophic factors, so things that might influence brain growth or changes in the brain, system changes in the brain and different structures, and ultimately changes in behavior. So she's been doing a lot of the research in Parkinson's and exercise as well, and so we chat at various meetings and whatnot to try to collaborate. So she's great. So now I'm going to go through some of the research that we actually have conducted at UBC at the Pacific Parkinson's Research Center, and also further research that we're continuing to do and opportunities for you guys to get involved. So the first study we looked at was called the brain and body connection. And what we did with this study was look at EEG, or the electrical activity of the brain, and EMG, the electrical activity of the muscles, to see how that connection was actually different between people with Parkinson's disease and people without Parkinson's disease. We also compared different clinical assessments of motor function, mood, and cognition to see if those were different during exercise. So what we see, so this is one of our great volunteers that allowed me to use her picture. What we do is we wire the cat or the head with a cat where we can measure the electrical activity of the brain. And instead of just looking at one electrode in the brain, we looked at a whole network, because we know the brain actually works as a network. So we looked at that overall, and then we also looked at the network of muscles, because we know it's not just one muscle that's activated, but a number of muscles during cycling. So we looked at a whole network, or the connectivity, EMG connectivity, we called that. So what did we find? Well, the first graph here, can everyone see my mouse on the screen?
I don't think you can,
Yes.
but if you at the top right.
Alana type here. Yes, perfect. Okay, so this graph here is the UPDRS, or the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, and this is a measure of motor symptom severity. And the different time points here are before exercise, after exercise, and then after 2 hours. So a couple of people are saying no. Let's see if I can. Can everyone see that green arrow? Yes, now, okay. So I'll use this green arrow to move around. So this scale here is the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. One-time scale we have is before exercise, then we have after exercise, and then 2 hours after exercise. And the amount of exercise we did here was 15 minutes. So there's actually 5 different intensities for 3 minutes each, with 3 minutes of rest. So it wasn't even 15 minutes straight of exercise, but little short durations of 3 minutes. And we showed a reduction in motor symptom severity of about 4.5 to 5 points on this scale. And this is actually a clinically significant change, as well as statistically. That's what these stars denote as well. So it shows that exercise actually improves a rating scale of motor symptom severity in Parkinson's, and just 15 minutes of exercise does that. The next test we did was called finger tapping. So this is where we take a task where people tap back and forth with their fingers, so back and forth, and we measure how fast they can do that and the number of taps they get. So the faster you can tap, the more taps you get, the less bradykinesia or slowness of movement you have. And we see with exercise, both PDs, which is this blue line, and controls, which is the red line, improve after exercise. So both groups get better. So it shows exercise actually facilitates movement, which would be beneficial. And this last graph is the PANIS, or the positive and negative effect schedule. And it's trying to capture how you feel right in the moment. And we see that the controls actually felt a little bit worse than the Parkinson's group at the start of exercise, but we see both groups improve after exercise, where people feel better after exercise. And this effect seems to last even more so in Parkinson's disease over that 2-hour washout period. So even 2 hours after doing 15 minutes of exercise, people feel better. So this starts to point us at the direction of that exercise is beneficial, But are these changes actually due to changes in the brain? Well, that's what we looked at here. So we actually see when we analyzed all of the muscular data in all the different subjects, we showed that the controls and PDs actually had a similar network, a similar connection of muscles where the muscles were acting quite similarly. But when we looked at the brain, we showed that the brains were actually quite different. And in Parkinson's disease, there was a specific network that we were able to identify. So that's what these yellow lines actually denote, is these connections between these electrodes were actually different at a specific frequency in Parkinson's compared to controls. We were actually able to significantly differentiate those two groups. But what does this network actually mean? So we took this network and we correlated it to the UPDRS to see if it's actually a function of how severe the motor symptoms are of Parkinson's disease. So we have UPDRS here on the y-axis, and we have the correlation score on the x. And we see as the UPDRS actually increases, we see a greater and greater correlation with this network. But yet remember that the motor symptoms, or the motor function, of the muscles were very similar. So it says despite having motor symptoms, people are able to cycle quite similarly to someone without Parkinson's disease. And it might be because of this network. So we took this network and we looked in the literature to see if anyone else identified something similar and what they thought it was. And what did we find? Well, we saw that the function of this brain network has sometimes been related to increases in rigidity. And so what we did is we took the rigidity subset scores of the UPDRS and we correlated that to our network. And we didn't find a correlation. This was so we figured this is actually unlikely that the brain changes that we see are related to an increase in rigidity. It's also been noted that this brain network is related to maintaining posture. So we thought, well, maybe it's because PD patients need greater need for postural stability as they cycle compared to control. So this could be a possibility. But the most interesting thing we found was that this brain network was actually related to sensory-motor integration. So this is a fancy way of saying it's how our brain actually interprets and integrates and combines all this sensory information it gathers from the environment. So things like your vision or your proprioception, knowing where your limbs are in space without looking at them, and all that together needs to be brought together and understood in your brain. And the basal ganglia, the part of the brain that actually does that, is affected in Parkinson's disease. So we think that this brain network actually compensates for that loss of sensory-motor integration and allows for better motor output to be sent out. So it allows the brain, the muscles to function quite similar to someone without Parkinson's disease, but the brain is acting quite differently. So in summary, we see a single bout of aerobic exercise, so just 15 minutes of exercise, improves motor symptoms and mood in Parkinson's disease. It shows that PDs and controls have similar muscular activity during cycling, but their brains are acting quite differently. So this is possibly a compensatory network that we have identified in the brain, and something that shows that exercise is quite beneficial for the therapies in Parkinson's disease. But with all research, there are limitations and future directions we need to pursue. So the first limitation is that all the subjects in the study were habitual exercisers. So meaning that they all have exercised for a good majority of their lives. So perhaps this network is just present in people that exercise. So we need to look at people that don't exercise. Also the type of exercise. We had these people cycling on stationary bikes. We identified this brain network, but perhaps it's different in other types of exercise, or maybe it's not just unique to people who exercise in general. Also VO2 max and heart rate reserve. So this is how we estimated someone's fitness. And we estimated this because we didn't have the equipment necessary or the budget to really look at all of this stuff in detail. So perhaps exercise intensity actually changes these different brain networks, or something we also need to look into. And this was also just in one single bout, just 15 minutes of exercise. So what would happen if we did multiple bouts of exercise? What would happen to this cortical or brain connectivity? Also, what would happen in the lifetime of exercise? And this last question kind of led us into our next exercise project, which was comparing exercisers and non-exercisers with Parkinson's disease. So we compared the brain We compared the brains of people who exercise, so that's our guy here, the brain here, and then we compared it to people who were just kicking back and relaxing. And we wanted to see if these brains were actually different in terms of dopamine release. So we used our fancy scanner here called the PET scanner, stands for positron emission tomography, and this allows us to study using radioisotopes specific cellular behavior in the brain. We also wanted to look at how the brain responded to reward. So we looked at an fMRI, which is basically looking at the structures in your brain and how these structures responded to stimuli like reward. And then we also looked at motor function, mood depression, and apathy, and cognitive changes. Well, what did we find? Well, this first scale here is a test called the timed up and go. And this is a functional assessment of gait. So what we do is we get someone to sit in a chair, they stand up, they walk 3 meters, and they come back and turn around, and then they sit down. And we do that as a nice measure of a functional assessment of how they're going to perform a task that they do every day. So we have time here on the y-axis, and the two groups are, the blue group is the people who have exercised their entire lives, and the red group are people who haven't exercised. And we show that the people who exercise their entire lives were able to do this test faster, despite having similar disease duration and similar motor symptom severity according to the UPDRS. So it shows that the people are better off functionally if they've been exercising their entire lives. Also, again, here's the finger tapping, and we show the blue bars. People were able to tap faster, so they have less bradykinesia compared to people who didn't exercise. So again, it shows exercise improves motor symptoms. And lastly, apathy. So it shows people who have exercised their entire lives, they have less apathy than someone who hasn't been exercising, so they're doing better mood-wise. But is this actually stemming from changes in the brain? Well, these two are two examples of the PET scans we conducted. And what we do for these PET scans is we do a baseline scan, and that's what we see here in the top figure. And these are people who have exercised. So we do a scan, and then we get someone to ride a bike for 30 minutes. And immediately after that 30-minute period of time, we put them back in the scanner, and we scan their brains again. And we're able to measure the amount of dopamine release. So I know these images might be a little bit small, but you can see these warm red and yellow areas in the brain. This is your basal ganglia, and the warm colors denote radioactivity from the radio tracer that we've injected. And if we see a reduction in that radioactivity, that actually means dopamine release. So that's what we see here in this little red, where the red area is where my green arrow is pointing right now. There's a high area of radioactivity that we've injected. And then after that radioactivity, after exercise, that radioactivity goes away, which denotes exercise-induced dopamine release. In the non-exercisers, we see that similar warm colored areas before exercise, and after exercise, those warm areas are still around. So it shows that exercise didn't release dopamine in people who didn't exercise for their entire lives. So graphically, this is what it looks like. We have binding potential, or measure of dopamine release. And we have the blue bars, people who have exercised their entire lives, and red bars are the people who didn't exercise. And we showed a significant difference in a specific area of the brain, which is denoted by those red arrows, that exercise actually releases more dopamine in people who have exercised their entire lives compared to people who didn't. So in summary, it shows habitual exercisers have more dopamine release, they have improved motor function, less apathy. So it shows that exercise seems to be beneficial. However, I will caution you, because this is causal evidence, so it's not, it's correlational evidence, not causal. So we don't know if exercise actually caused these differences that we see, but exercise might be a contributing factor. And this supports a lot of the anecdotal evidence we see in the clinic, that people who have been exercising their entire lives and continue to exercise with Parkinson's disease seem to do better in our clinic overall. So really, exercise is seen to be beneficial clinically. It's just we haven't been able to prove why exactly. So the limitations of this study and future directions is, this is a retrospective cohort study, meaning that we compared two groups of people at one point in time. So the question that we're kind of left with is, if we actually think exercise is neuroprotective, how do these habitual exercisers actually get Parkinson's disease to begin with? Perhaps there's a different pathology. Perhaps they're exposed to different environmental factors that might contribute to disease. Perhaps there's different genetic factors that might contribute. So it's very difficult to actually look at a lot of these changes within one point of time. We also used exercise as a stimulus for dopamine release. And of course, someone who's been exercising their entire lives, they're going to be in a different fitness or different shape compared to someone who hasn't exercised. So the amount of exercise might be different, and this might actually influence some of the symptoms. We looked at this when we did our analysis of the cofactor, and it wasn't significant, but it still might contribute to some of the findings. So we also have to look at exercise intensity as a factor. Lastly, we were left with the question, what happens to these people who haven't exercised? If their brains are different from a lifetime of exercise, can we actually take someone who's a non-exerciser and convert them into a habitual exerciser? Can we change their brains and make them look like someone who's been exercising their entire lives? And that's what led us to our last study, and the study we're currently conducting right now, which is exercise in Parkinson's disease, the basis for motor and cognitive benefits. So what we're going to do is we're going to take people who have been couch potatoes or hanging out, haven't been exercising a whole lot, might be somewhat active, but certainly not running any marathons or anything like that. We're going to image their brains, again with our PET imaging and our fMRI, and then we're going to exercise 3 months, 3 times a week for 3 months. You're going to be working with a trainer, and we're going to implement an exercise program and try to change some of your lifestyle choices. And then we're going to image your brain again and see if it changes. And ultimately, we hope to bring you into the same setting as someone who's been exercising their entire lives. So the type of brain imaging we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at dopamine release. But instead of using exercise as our stimulus, we're going to superficially stimulate your brain with a technique called transcranial magnetic stimulation. So we're able to stimulate the brain superficially without the influence of exercise. We're also going to look at the effect of neuroinflammation. So there's a theory with Parkinson's disease and the progression of Parkinson's disease that it might be associated to neuroinflammation. So imagine that you're walking in your hallway and you bang your leg against the coffee table and you get a bruise in your leg and you get swelling within that area. You actually have cell death within that area as your body's trying to repair itself. And something similar might be occurring in your brain. There might be an initial environmental insult years and years and years ago that might have caused this initial swelling. And this swelling might have become chronic over time. And there can be a number of reasons why this occurred, but it might become chronic. And as it becomes chronic, it actually spreads some of the disease. So we actually think exercise might mediate that or decrease the amount of overall inflammation in the brain, which will be beneficial. So we're going to monitor that with exercise. We also want to see if the brain can actually be plastic in terms of exercise. We know the brain can change with different experiences. We know where it's likely to change with exercise, so we want to be able to measure that. So we're going to look at different changes in cortical connectivity, so how your brain is communicating, and different changes in neuroplasticity. The next step we're going to do is we're going to look at disease progression. So we think exercise actually alters disease progression, and there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence, and people have suggested this for a number of years, but no one's actually proved it. So we're going to buy you a gym membership after that 3 months at a gym of your choice, including Steve Nash or the City of Vancouver, or we have a number of different partners, and we're going to exercise for 3 years. You're encouraged to go off on your own, join a class or whatnot for 3 years and continue exercising. And we're going to see if these changes, these lifestyle changes, are going to improve disease progression. Are they going to decrease the amount of progression we see compared to someone who haven't exercised? And we're able to monitor that with some of our neuroimaging. So we're going to look at the number of dopamine cells in the brain, and then again look at the amount of neuroinflammation in the brain to see if these two are related. So it's quite exciting. This is the study we're currently recruiting for. So if you are interested, you can take my contact information down at the end of the presentation, and then we can chat a little bit offline as well. So let me take away the pointer. Ultimately, we want to see if exercise actually changes quality of life. I said at the beginning of my presentation, this is kind of one of the focuses to see is if exercise actually changes quality of life, and we suspect it does, but we need to be able to show it, so hopefully the government can ultimately pay for it. So we've done a collaboration project with Lionsgate Hospital and the Vancouver Coastal Health Research Institute to again run community classes, because there's a lot of outpatient care that's great, and you can see a physio, which would also be fantastic, but all of that is very expensive. So we want to see if community centers can actually offer exercise classes for Parkinson's disease patients and improve overall quality of life. This would make exercise more accessible and beneficial in the long run. So we're going to look at quality of life measures, gait, functional measures with 9 months of exercise. So you have the opportunity to participate in a study like this, where you can exercise for 3 months with a trainer, and then enroll in this program and exercise twice a week for 9 months with a trainer, all free of charge, and ultimately improve exercise overall and change different lifestyle choices. So what are the take-home messages? What do I really want you to take home from this webinar? Well, do we actually see changes in the brain with exercise? In Parkinson's disease, we see exercise might actually facilitate compensatory brain networks. So we see that in our EEG study, where the brain is actually acting differently but allowing for a similar motor output. We also see long-term exercise or a lifetime exercise seem to have beneficial effects on the brain, and we see improvements in motor and non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So exercise is definitely beneficial in the long run. And we also see relationships to dopamine release, and we know dopamine is the important chemical in Parkinson's disease, and if exercise can supplement some of the dopamine changes, that would be really beneficial overall. But ultimately, more research is really needed to harness the true potential of exercise for Parkinson's disease. So how can we really convert this to living well with Parkinson's disease? What is my exercise prescription for you, and how is this really going to impact your quality of life overall? Well, what I can recommend is do what you enjoy. The only way you're going to get the beneficial effects of Parkinson's disease, or the beneficial effects of exercise in Parkinson's disease, is actually doing exercise. And the only way you're actually going to do exercise is if you actually like it. Also, do what you can tolerate. So more is better than a little. So you should be doing a lot of exercise, but it's better than doing a little. A little is still better than doing nothing. The worst thing you can do is just sit on the couch and do nothing and watch TV. So do a little bit. If you can do a lot, that's great, but at least get out there. Also, it's important to incorporate rest periods. The worst thing you can do is exercise a ton, end up getting an injury, and then not being able to exercise at all. So don't be afraid to incorporate rest periods. Some different paradigms you can do is you can exercise 5 days in a row, but then take the weekend off. You can try to work this into your work schedule if you're still currently working. You can also do 3 days on and then take a day off if that works best for your schedule. Or you could just do every other day. Commonly we can work, when I train people 3 days a week, we commonly do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because it works well, fits in the schedule quite easily. When you're looking at different types of exercise, don't be afraid to switch it up. Your body and your brain are going to get used to the exercise you're always doing. So don't be afraid to add something new in, challenge yourself, and try something different. Now this next point is for all the care partners out there as well. Encourage your partner to join you. It's always better, and you're always more likely to do something if you have some support. So get your partner out there, get out and do something together. This will provide a really good social setting. If that's not your thing, you can also join a group class. Having that as social accountability really encourages you to get out there and exercise. And also, don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, it's great to go work with a personal trainer if you can afford it and it works in your system, so that would be beneficial. You're certainly going to get better effects doing that. Also, if you need a physiotherapist, we have great physiotherapists at our center. It's really great to see them, so it's okay to get some help with this. Exercise is a general thing that people know about, but you should also be getting a lot of good advice as well. So these are the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines. So there's, I've attached the PDF here, so you can click on that and it takes you to the website. And they recommend 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity for bouts of more than 10 minutes. I would encourage even going for 20 minutes or more. I think that is where you really start to see the benefits. And this is just the minimum. Obviously, if you're able to, try to exceed these minimum guidelines. Also be beneficial to add in a couple days of resistance training. You don't necessarily need a gym membership to do this. You can just try to do a couple push-ups if your shoulders are stable, or modify different things within your house to try to get some of this resistance training as well. There's also some PD-specific exercises that are on the Parkinsons.ca website. So they've kind of brought together some of the Canadian experts on exercise to design some of these guidelines, and they're really good and beneficial for different types of balance. So this is something you can also look at if you need some resources. So lastly, to really truly live well with Parkinson's disease, it's going to be an equation where you have to really balance your quality of life, so things like balance, work, social support, looking at your family and hobbies, and try to balance all those things and try to prioritize what you actually think is going to improve your quality of life. And you got to look at the disease management. So you got to see how you're going to manage your disease, how you're going to incorporate it. Can you manage it with medication, combination of medication with diet and exercise? Are you interested in participating in research? Will this help with disease management? What are you going to really look at? And really try to understand and use the information provided by your healthcare providers to make these choices. So with that, I want to thank the whole group at the Pacific Parkinson's Research Center. These are all the research coordinators that worked tirelessly on the projects. This person here is Danielle Murray, who is a huge part. She was a master's student with Dr. Stossel, who's a huge part of all the exercise studies we've conducted here. So if you are interested in participating in some of our research programs, or you just want to learn more information about it or some of the stuff we've published, please visit our website. You can send an email to our general research email, or my personal email is here as well if you have specific questions for me, as well as my work phone number. So I want to thank the Pacific Parkinson's Society of British Columbia and all their help that they've done. They've done a fabulous job organizing this. Miriam's done a fantastic job getting this all together. So I want to thank you all, and I would be happy to answer any questions you guys have.